This is the most terrifying reality of the UK property market right now. It's not a crash in the way you remember 2008. There are no panicked headlines, no emergency interventions, no queues outside banks. But make no mistake, what's happening is just as severe, perhaps even worse, because this time, it's invisible. House prices look stable on paper. Transactions are ticking along. But when you actually dig into the numbers, when you strip away the smoke and mirrors, you discover something shocking. Real house prices, adjusted for inflation, have collapsed by over 17.5% since 2021. That's almost identical to the drop we saw during the financial crisis. Except back then, everyone knew. This time, inflation is doing the dirty work, quietly eroding the value of your property while the price tag stays the same. It's a stealth crash hidden in plain sight. But this appearance of stability is an illusion. And what's really happening on the ground is even more alarming. If you want to stay ahead of what's really happening in the UK property market, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel now. We cut through the noise and bring you the real data, the hidden trends, and the stories the mainstream media won't tell you about UK housing. You need to know what's coming, and we're here to make sure you do. Let's start with why everyone thinks everything is fine. Open any property news site, and the headlines will tell you the market is stable. House prices have grown a modest 2.7% over the last 3 years. Mortgage rates have finally stopped rising. On the surface, it all looks remarkably normal, boring even. But that's precisely the problem. This illusion of stability is carefully constructed by a combination of government policy and good old-fashioned inflation. Since 2021, if you adjust for inflation, your property has lost nearly a fifth of its real value. The reason most people don't realize this is because the mortgage statement still shows the same number. There's no dramatic, visible moment of recognition like there was in 2008. This time, the correction is happening in slow motion, stretched out over years instead of months, and it's deliberate. Nobody in power can afford another 2008. So instead of a sharp, visible crash that would trigger panic, we get this, a gradual, invisible erosion of value that hurts just as much but doesn't make headlines. Inflation becomes the politically convenient crash in history, because most people don't even know they're living through it. But if you're a seller, you know something is broken. And that brings us to the real, immediate pressure point. If you're trying to sell your property right now, the market feels different. Properties are sitting longer, buyers are scarcer. The underlying problem? Supply is absolutely exploding. This year alone, there have been 1.4 million new property listings across the UK. With all that supply, only 780,000 properties actually completed sales. That means hundreds of thousands of properties are just sitting, accumulating, creating an oversupply that pushes prices down. And when supply exceeds demand, only one thing happens. Prices drop. This year has already seen 919,000 price reductions. That's the highest number ever recorded, a 16% increase on last year. These aren't small token reductions either. Nearly 40% of all properties that eventually sold had at least one price cut before completion. This creates a downward spiral where each price reduction sets a new benchmark, forcing the next seller to go even lower. This glut of supply isn't random. There are three powerful, intersecting forces pushing millions of people to sell right now. The first is the most straightforward, interest rates. Over 1.8 million homeowners are rolling off their cheap fixed-rate mortgage deals this year. These are people who locked in rates around 2% when money was essentially free. Now they're moving on to new deals closer to 5%. For the average homeowner, that means mortgage payments jumping 30% to 50% overnight. Some households can absorb that, but many cannot. And when you can't afford your mortgage anymore, you have one option: sell. These aren't discretionary sellers choosing an ideal moment to move. These are forced sellers under financial pressure, often willing to accept lower offers just to get out before the situation gets worse. But forced sellers are just one piece of the puzzle. There's a quiet, panicky exit happening among another group. The second group quietly panic selling are pensioners. Since 2024, there's been a 26% surge in older homeowners downsizing or selling up entirely. While some of this is natural, much of it is driven by one thing: fear. Fear of inheritance tax changes. Fear of capital gains tax reforms. Fear that the government is coming for their property wealth. With increasing political noise around taxing assets, many retirees are making defensive moves. They're liquidating now, gifting property to children, selling assets before potential tax changes bite. This isn't healthy market behavior. This is defensive selling driven by political uncertainty, adding thousands more properties to an already oversaturated market. The final group of sellers is having the most catastrophic impact of all, and it's created a painful, cruel irony for renters. The third group is landlords, and they're not just selling in small numbers. They're exiting the market in their droves. A staggering 1/3 of all UK landlords have either already sold up or are actively trying to sell right now. The reason is the Renters' Rights Act. With the abolition of Section 21, the no-fault eviction rule, landlords face enormous compliance burdens, regulatory fines up to £40,000, and a complete loss of control over their own properties. They're selling because it's no longer a viable business. And here's the cruel irony: landlord sales are now the single biggest cause of tenant homelessness in the UK. The very legislation designed to protect renters is forcing them out of their homes as landlords exit the market en masse. It's solving one problem by creating another. So, as individual sellers flee and properties flood the market, who exactly is stepping in to buy? The answer should shock you. While private landlords are fleeing the sector, someone much bigger is stepping in to fill the void: corporations. Massive institutional investors who see opportunity where everyone else sees risk. They're not buying a few properties here and there. They're buying thousands, tens of thousands. The build-to-rent sector just had its biggest year on record, with £5 billion invested in 2024 alone. These aren't small-time investors. These are pension funds, private equity firms, and major financial institutions building rental empires. Granger, the UK's largest private landlord, owns over 11,000 homes. Lloyds Banking Group wants 50,000 homes by 2030. These corporate giants are embracing the new regulations because the rules that crush individual landlords are simply operational costs to them. But this isn't just about money. It's about power. Because once they have it, who will suffer the most? This corporate takeover is creating a fundamental restructuring of who owns housing. We're moving from a market dominated by small landlords to one controlled by massive institutional players. Once that transition is complete, they will have pricing power. They'll be able to set rents across entire cities and have monopolistic control over essential housing. Meanwhile, the central paradox continues to torture the UK. Experts agree that for housing to become affordable, house prices need to stagnate for approximately 30 years. That would restore the dream of home ownership for younger generations. But that same 30 years of stagnation would be catastrophic for current homeowners, whose wealth and retirement security is tied up in property. While this battle plays out, rents aren't stagnating, they're soaring. Average rents have surged 40% over the last 5 years, squeezing tenants harder than ever. This is a vicious cycle that benefits almost no one, except the corporations swooping in to buy up everything in sight. We're watching the UK housing market undergo a fundamental transformation that most people don't even realize is happening. Individual home ownership is declining. Private landlords are exiting en masse. Corporate ownership is rising faster than anyone predicted. This isn't a temporary blip. This is a structural shift in who owns property in the UK. We're moving from a nation of small landlords and owner-occupiers to a system dominated by corporate landlords and long-term renters. And once that transition is complete, reversing it will be nearly impossible. The government is depending on these corporations to solve the housing crisis, but in doing so, they're creating a future where housing isn't controlled by millions of individual owners, it's controlled by a handful of massive entities making coordinated strategic choices. That concentration of power should worry everyone. The question we all need to ask ourselves is this: is this corporate takeover of UK housing simply the natural evolution of the market, an unstoppable force driven by economics and regulation? Or is it a policy failure, something that could be prevented, redirected, or reversed if there was political will to do it? Because the next 5 years are going to determine the shape of UK housing for the next 50. And most people have no idea it's even happening. If you found this valuable, if this opened your eyes to what's really going on beneath the surface of the UK property market, share this video with someone who needs to see it. The mainstream news isn't telling this story. We're here to make sure you see the full picture.